The silence after the shouting felt worse than the shouting. A man stood between a restless crowd and a place no one should touch. His hand smelled of oil and smoke. His robe was heavy with color and gold, but his chest felt light, like something inside him had gone missing. Voices kept rising. Why him? Why his family? A question dressed as justice. He didn't answer. He listened, because one wrong word from a priest can become a spark. Behind him, the tent curtains barely moved in the desert wind. In front of him, faces hardened. Friends looked away. Even the faithful began to count how many stood against him. This man was Aaron, brother to Moses, servant of God, and suddenly the target of everyone's doubt. That night, leaders brought their staffs, each one carved with a name. Aaron laid his own staff down too, plain wood, no tricks, no proof, only a waiting. And in the dark, the question became a threat. When morning comes, will God defend Aaron or expose him? Morning didn't bring peace. It brought a line. One by one, tribal leaders stepped forward, gripping their staffs like they were titles. Wood scraped stone. Men avoided each other's eyes. The air smelled like dust and old anger. Aaron stood near Moses, but he felt alone anyway. Being close to a prophet didn't stop people from blaming you. Then Korah's voice cut through the crowd, smooth, confident. "You take too much on yourselves," he said. "All the people are holy. Why do you lift yourselves above us?" Heads nodded. Even some Levites nodded. That hurt more than the shouting. These were his own. Aaron's throat tightened. He wanted to defend himself. He wanted to say, "I didn't ask for this." But a priest can't beg for his role. If he begs, the role is already broken. Moses fell face down, not panic, pressure, like he was carrying the whole camp on his back. And Aaron understood the trap. If he spoke, they'd call it pride. If he stayed silent, they'd call it guilt. Korah smiled as if the verdict was already written. Moses finally put nyavsa and said one sentence that made the desert feel colder. "Tomorrow the Lord will show who is his." Aaron looked at the plain staff in his hand. Tomorrow wasn't a debate, it was a test. That night the camp sounded different. Not loud, busy. Whispering moved through the tents like insects in dry grass. Every family had an opinion. Every opinion became a warning. Aaron sat under a small lamp flame, polishing nothing, just moving his hands so they wouldn't shake. His priestly clothes lay folded nearby, heavy even when they weren't on him. Outside, footsteps stopped and started. People walked past his tent slower than usual, as if curiosity could turn into courage if they lingered long enough. A young Levite came in, eyes wide. "They're saying the priesthood should belong to all of us." Aaron held his gaze. "And what do you think?" The young man hesitated. That pause said everything. Aaron didn't argue. He just nodded once, like he accepted the cut. When the Levite left, Aaron reached for his staff. Plain wood, no jewels, no writing. It felt almost embarrassing next to the others. He remembered the first day he wore the breastplate, how the stones caught the sun. People had cheered then. Now those same stones felt like targets. He stepped outside. The desert wind carried the smell of incense from the tabernacle. Soft, steady, stubborn. In the distance, Korah's campfire burned brighter than the rest. Laughter floated over the sand. Aaron tightened his grip on the staff. If God stayed silent tomorrow, Aaron knew what would happen. The crowd wouldn't just reject him. They would rewrite what holiness means. And once that happens, no one is safe. The next day, the sun rose like a witness. Korah and his men didn't come quietly. They came dressed for certainty. 250 leaders walked with them, men people trusted, men who had settled disputes and carried weight in the camp. Each one held a bronze censer. Aaron's stomach turned. A censer wasn't a toy. It was a claim. I can stand where priests stand. I can offer what priests offer. Moses spoke first, but his voice didn't fight the noise. It cut through it. Bring your censers before the Lord, he said. You and Aaron, let God choose. Aaron felt every eye slide to him, not curiosity now, judgment, as if the crowd had already decided he was the problem. He put on the full garments this time, blue, gold, stones across his chest, not to impress anyone, to obey. Still, the breastplate felt like a door he couldn't close. Korah stepped closer, smiling like a man who had already won. We are holy too. Aaron didn't answer. He lifted his own censer with careful hands. Incense spilled its sweet smoke into the dry air. Then the ground seemed to hold its breath. All around them, people leaned in, waiting for a sign, any sign. Aaron stared at the rising smoke and thought, if this goes wrong, it won't just be my name that burns. And suddenly he realized the real danger wasn't Korah's anger. It was the crowd's hunger to watch holiness get humiliated. The smoke kept rising. For a moment, nothing happened. Just sweet scent and harsh sun and too many men pretending they weren't afraid. Aaron's fingers tightened around the censer handle. He could hear his own breath inside his chest, loud as a drum. Around him, the leaders of Korah stood shoulder to shoulder, faces lifted like they deserved an answer. Then Moses spoke again, slower now. Step back. The crowd shifted, confused. Some obeyed, others stayed, hungry for drama. Korah didn't move at all. He looked at Aaron like a man watching a wall crack. Aaron wanted to whisper to Moses, please, don't let it be public. But holiness was never private for long. A tremor ran through the sand, small, like a warning someone could ignore. A few children cried out. A tent rope snapped somewhere behind them. The air changed. The incense smell didn't vanish, but it felt thinner, like the desert had stolen it. Korah's smile faded. He glanced down just once. Aaron followed his eyes. The ground beneath the challengers looked the same as always, until it didn't. A fine line appeared in the dust, quiet and sharp, running between 2 feet like a drawn verdict. Nobody spoke, not because they were respectful, because they finally understood. This wasn't a meeting. It was a sentence being written, and the line was still moving. The crack stopped. For one heartbeat, the desert waited, like it would allow them to change their minds. Korah lifted his chin again. Pride is stubborn. He opened his mouth, maybe to laugh, maybe to shout. Moses didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He just stood there, eyes fixed, as if listening to something deeper than the camp. Aaron stepped back, one step only, not from fear of Korah, but from fear of being too close to God's answer. The leaders with censers shifted their weight. Bronze clinked. Smoke curled upward, nervous and thin. Then the ground moved again. Not a roar, a pull. Dust slid inward. Tent pegs leaned. People stumbled away, grabbing children, grabbing sleeves, grabbing anything that felt solid. Aaron's heart hammered, but his face stayed still. A priest learns to hold panic behind his eyes. Korah's confidence broke in silence. He reached out to someone, anyone, but the circle around him opened, not with kindness, with instinct. No one wanted to be linked to him now. Aaron watched the line widen, and he felt something ugly in himself. Relief. Relief that God spoke. Relief that the question was answered. And then shame, because relief still has a price. When the dust settled, the crowd didn't cheer. They stared at the empty space like it could swallow more than rebels. Aaron lowered his censer. The smoke kept rising, but now it smelled like warning. And Aaron knew the test wasn't over, because the people would blame someone. If not Korah, then him. By evening, the camp had a new story. Not Korah rebelled, not God judged. The story became, Aaron brought death into the camp. Whispers turned into a crowd. Faces came fast, eyes sharp. People pointed without using fingers. Their mouths said justice, but their bodies said revenge. Aaron stood near the tabernacle, and he could feel fear rolling toward him like heat. Not one person, thousands, a storm of voices. You killed the Lord's people. That sentence hit harder than any stone, because it wasn't true, and because it was close enough to sound true in angry mouths. Moses and Aaron stepped forward together. For a moment, Aaron thought, maybe words can still fix this. Then the cloud above the tabernacle shifted. The light dimmed. The air tightened. A warning settled over the crowd, heavy and quiet, and people didn't notice it because they were too busy being sure. Aaron saw the change first, the way some faces suddenly went pale, the way a man coughed and looked confused, the way a woman grabbed her child like the ground itself had turned unsafe. Moses turned to Aaron, eyes wide. Take your censer, he said, voice urgent now. Run into the middle. Run. The high priest, wearing stones and gold, was told to run into a crowd that hated him. Aaron didn't ask why. He grabbed the censer and stepped toward the storm. Aaron ran, not like a warrior, like a man trying to stop a door from slamming. The crowd was thick, shoulders, elbows, shouting mouths. He pushed through, holding the censer close so it wouldn't spill. Incense smoke trailed behind him, a thin ribbon in the dusty air. People didn't make space for him. Some stepped away like he carried a curse. Others leaned in, ready to accuse him again. Aaron kept moving anyway, eyes scanning faces. He saw it now, fear spreading faster than anger. A man sat down suddenly, dizzy. A woman swayed and grabbed a tent pole. Children cried because the adults looked lost. This wasn't a debate anymore. Aaron stopped in the middle, where the panic felt hottest. He lifted the censer high and swung it gently, letting the smoke rise. His lips moved, not for the crowd, toward God. Around him, people kept stumbling back, like waves pulling away from a shore. The air felt sharp, then softer, then sharp again. Aaron's arms burned, his robe clung with sweat. The gemstones on his chest didn't feel like honor now. They felt like weight. 12 reminders of 12 tribes, and he was standing between them and judgment. He took one step forward, then another, smoke in front of him, fear behind him, until he found a line no one could see. On one side, people fell into silence. On the other side, people kept crying out. Aaron stood on that invisible border and didn't move, because he understood the priesthood wasn't power. It was standing in the gap. And he didn't know how long the gap would hold. When it finally slowed, the camp felt hollow, not quiet like rest, quiet like shock. Aaron's arm dropped. The censer hung low, still breathing smoke. He stood there longer than he needed to, because he was afraid to move and discover it wasn't over. Moses found him first. He didn't speak right away. His eyes moved across the crowd. People sitting in dust, families holding each other, leaders staring at the ground like their pride had been snapped. Aaron looked down at his own hands. They were steady now. That scared him too. How quickly a man can get used to standing near judgment. He walked back toward the tabernacle slowly, like returning from a war no one would call a war. The gold plate on his turban caught the last light of day, flashing once, then fading. Behind him, people watched, not with anger now, with distance, like he was necessary and dangerous. That night, the leaders brought the staffs again, 12 rods, each marked by a tribe. Another test, Moses said, one that would end the argument. Aaron held his staff last, plain wood. But now it felt heavier than any weapon, because it carried his name and the weight of everyone who hated that name. He laid it down with the others inside the tent. Then he stepped back. No speeches, no defense, just the sound of the curtain closing. And the thought that kept biting him in the dark. What if tomorrow God proves him right, and the people still won't forgive him? Before sunrise, The tent felt like it was holding its own breath. Moses went in alone. The curtain fell behind him, and the camp waited outside like a courtroom with no judge in sight. Aaron stood among the leaders, hands empty, pretending he wasn't counting heartbeats. The desert was cold at this hour. His breath fogged for a moment, then vanished, like prayers that don't know where to land. Men shifted, restless. Someone cleared his throat. Another man muttered, "If nothing changes, we settle it ourselves." Aaron didn't look at him. He stared at the curtain. When Moses came out, he wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry either. His face was careful, like a man carrying something fragile that could break a nation. He lifted one staff for all to see. Not any staff. Aaron's. It wasn't plain anymore. The wood had changed in the dark. Small buds clung to it, pale and alive, like the desert had forgotten its own rules. Blossoms opened along the grain, and there, impossible, almonds, formed where no fruit should ever be. A sound moved through the crowd, half gasp, half fear. Aaron felt his knees weaken, not from pride, but from weight, because God had spoken clearly, and clear answers create new problems. The people stepped back from Aaron as if holiness had teeth. One man whispered, "We will die. We will all die if we come near." Aaron held the flowering staff and realized the truth. This wasn't just proof. It was a boundary, and everyone was suddenly terrified of where that boundary might fall. The staff stayed in Aaron's hands all day, and it felt like holding a warning that could bloom. People kept coming just to look, not to celebrate, more like to measure the distance between themselves and God. Mothers pulled children closer. Old men lowered their eyes. Even the loud ones spoke softer, like volume could cross a boundary. Moses said, "Put it back, before the testimony. Keep it there." So Aaron walked toward the tent with slow steps. The curtain brushed his shoulder. Inside, the air smelled of oil, incense, and something older, like memories soaked into cloth. He placed the staff where it belonged, buds and blossoms still bright against plain wood. For a moment, he didn't let go. He wanted to ask God a question he couldn't shape into prayer. "If you defend me, will you defend me from them too?" Outside, the camp didn't relax. Fear just changed clothes. "We're finished," someone whispered. "If we come near, we die." "And if we stay far," another voice answered, "how do we worship? How do we live?" Aaron heard it and felt the twist in his chest. They feared the Holy One, but their eyes still slid back to the priest like he was the problem standing too close. That evening, a group of leaders approached, quiet now, careful, like men speaking near a cliff edge. "We need rules," one said. "Clear rules. Who can come? Who must not?" Aaron nodded. Rules were mercy. Lines were mercy. He explained what he already knew. Who may carry holy things? Who may approach? Who must never reach past the curtain? His voice stayed calm, but every sentence drew another line in the sand, and with every line people stepped a little farther from him. A boy behind the men whispered to his father, "So Aaron gets to stand closer than us." Aaron heard it. His jaw tightened. He wanted to say, "Closer isn't safer." He wanted to say, "I stand here so you don't have to." But he stayed quiet. Because if he said it out loud, it would sound like pride again, and pride was the fuel of yesterday's rebellion. Night fell. The campfires dimmed. The desert cooled. Aaron lay awake, staring into dark fabric, listening to distant coughs, murmurs, and the soft cry of a child who wouldn't settle. God had ended the argument about authority. Now Aaron had to live inside the answer, held up by heaven, held at a distance by people. And a new fear crept in, quiet and practical. If they are this terrified of holiness, what will they do the next time thirst and anger return? Thirst doesn't ask permission. It came back like an old enemy. Quiet at first, then everywhere. Skins felt lighter, lips cracked, Complaints started as murmurs and ended as chants. Aaron heard the sound before he saw the crowd, that same restless rhythm, the one that meant the camp had found a target. People gathered at the entrance of the tent, not with staffs this time, but with empty jars. Mothers held clay cups like evidence. Men pointed toward the wilderness as if God had misplaced a river. "Why did you bring us here?" they shouted. "Was it to die in the desert?" Aaron stood beside Moses and felt something sink in him. They had just survived rebellion, judgment, and proof, yet thirst erased memory in a single day. It didn't matter that Aaron's staff had blossomed. It didn't matter that God had spoken. What mattered was water. The crowd pushed closer. Aaron could smell sweat and dust and desperation. He saw fear hiding under anger, the way it always did. Moses' face tightened. Aaron knew that look. Pressure, turning into heat. They went into the tent to seek God. Inside, the air was calmer, but Aaron's heart wasn't. He waited, listening for the voice Moses listened for. When Moses turned back toward the curtain, his eyes were sharp. "Take the staff," he said. Aaron's fingers went cold. Which staff? The blossoming one, kept as a warning, the symbol of authority, the line that said, "Do not cross." Aaron followed Moses out. The sun hit them hard. The rock stood nearby, silent, stubborn, like it had always been. The people were still shouting, still accusing, still sure they were right. Moses stepped forward with the staff in his hand. Aaron saw his brother's shoulders rise with breath, like a man about to speak and break something. Aaron leaned close, voice low. "Moses, be careful." Moses didn't look at him. He looked at the crowd. "Listen," Moses said, and his tone carried steel. "Must we bring you water from this rock?" "We." That word landed in Aaron like a stone. Aaron's eyes flicked to the staff. Not just wood, a witness. He wanted to stop time, to pull Moses back one step, to take the words back into his brother's mouth. But the crowd kept pressing, the desert kept baking, the moment kept tightening. And Aaron realized something terrifying. The next crisis wasn't testing the people. It was testing the leaders. And the staff in Moses' hand was about to become more than a symbol. Moses lifted the staff. Aaron saw his brother's hand tremble, not from weakness, from anger, held too long. The crowd was loud, but the rock was louder in its own way, silent, refusing, daring them. "Must we bring you water?" Moses had said. Aaron couldn't unhear the "we." He wanted to reach for Moses' sleeve, to pull him back into the tent, back into quiet, back into listening. But a priest touching a leader in front of a crowd can look like a fight for control, and the people were already hungry to watch leaders collapse. Moses stepped closer to the rock. His jaw tightened. His eyes didn't search for God now. They searched the faces in front of him as if he could punish thirst by punishing them. Aaron swallowed. The air tasted like chalk. Then Moses struck the rock. The sound snapped through the heat, wood on stone, a sharp crack. Some people flinched. Aaron flinched too, but for a different reason. It felt like striking the line God had drawn. A heartbeat later, Moses struck again. 2 blows, 2 echoes, and then water. Not a trickle. A sudden rush, pouring into sand, filling cups, soaking hems. The crowd surged forward with shouts that changed into relief. Children laughed. Men dropped to their knees to drink. The crisis broke open like a jar. But Aaron didn't feel relief. He felt dread, because he knew God could give water even when leaders behave wrongly. Provision didn't mean approval. Aaron turned his eyes toward the tent. The cloud above it seemed still, but the stillness felt heavy, like a door closing without sound. Moses stood with the staff lowered, chest rising fast. The people were cheering now, cheering the moment, cheering the water, cheering the men who stood closest to it, and Aaron felt the temptation for both of them, to accept the cheers as proof. Then the voice came, not loud, not dramatic, but final in its calm. Because you did not trust me, you will not bring this assembly into the land I give them. Aaron's throat went dry again, even with water everywhere. Moses didn't move. Aaron didn't move. The crowd didn't understand what had just happened because they were drinking. But Aaron understood. A single moment had changed their whole future, not the people's rebellion this time, the leader's impatience. Aaron looked at the staff in Moses' hand and realized the terrible irony. It had blossomed to prove calling. Now it had witnessed failure. And the consequence wasn't private shame. It was the end of an era. After the water, the camp felt almost happy. That was the strangest part. People sang again. Children ran with wet hands. Pots clinked. The sound of relief covered everything, like a blanket thrown over a crack in the ground. But Aaron walked through it as if he was carrying bad news in his bones. He saw Moses sitting alone at dusk, staring at his staff like it had betrayed him. The old fire in Moses' eyes was still there, but now it burned inward. Aaron sat beside him. They didn't speak at first. The desert wind moved between them, cool, almost gentle. It didn't feel deserved. Finally Moses whispered, "I was tired." Aaron nodded. That wasn't an excuse, it was the truth. "Tired of them," Moses added. "Tired of the same hunger, the same fear, the same blame." Aaron swallowed. "And tired of being watched," he said. Moses looked at him then, sharp, wounded. God said we didn't trust him. Aaron's chest tightened. Trust. The word sounded simple until it cost everything. They were leaders. They were supposed to carry the people. And now the sentence had been spoken. They would not lead them into the land. Aaron could feel the weight of it settling like dust. Not dramatic, not sudden, just final. The next days were filled with movement. Messages passed. Tribes packed and repacked. Routes were argued. Edom refused them passage. More delays, more pressure. And in the middle of it, Aaron felt his own body change. Not sickness that made him fall, just a quiet weakening, a heaviness in his steps, a tightness in his breath after small walks. He didn't tell anyone, not at first. A high priest doesn't announce weakness. People already feared holiness. They didn't need to fear instability, too. But Moses noticed. He always noticed. One morning, Moses touched Aaron's shoulder, gentle but firm. "You're slowing," he said. Aaron forced a small smile. "Maybe I'm finally learning to rest." Moses didn't smile back. His eyes looked past Aaron, toward the hills ahead, as if he could already see something waiting. Then the message came, quiet, direct, from the Lord. "Take Aaron and bring him up Mount Hor." Aaron heard it and felt the world tilt. Mount Hor. That wasn't a new assignment. That was an ending. Aaron looked at Moses. His brother's face tightened like he was holding back a shout. Aaron wanted to tell him, it's okay. But it wasn't. Because the priesthood wasn't just a job. It was a line. And now, God was about to move that line. Without him. Mount Hor looked closer than it should. Not because it moved. Because the days behind them suddenly felt small. Aaron walked at Moses' side. Eleazar followed, quiet, trying to act like this was just another climb. But Aaron could hear his son's breathing, careful, controlled, frightened. The path was narrow, rocks warm from sun. Wind pushed at Aaron's robe, tugging the blue fabric like a hand that wouldn't let go. Each step made the breastplate shift against his chest, gemstones clicking softly, 12 tribes tapping out a goodbye. No crowd came with them. God didn't invite witnesses. That felt like mercy. Halfway up, Moses stopped. He didn't say, "Are you ready?" Because there's no such thing. He just looked at Aaron with an expression that asked a different question. Why does it have to be you? Aaron's mouth went dry. "We both heard the sentence," he said quietly. Moses' eyes flashed. I should have spoken to the rock, he muttered. I should have. Aaron lifted a hand, not to silence him, to hold him. It's done, Aaron said. The simplest words are the hardest. They kept climbing. Near the top, the wind grew stronger. The camp below looked like scattered dots. The noise of people vanished, and with it, the illusion that leadership is big. Up here, it was just 3 men and a command. Moses turned to Aaron. Take off the garments. Aaron froze. The garments weren't clothing. They were calling. They were the line between holy and common. They were the reason the people kept their distance. Aaron's fingers trembled as he loosened the sash. The blue robe slid free. The breastplate came off last, heavy as memory. In the wind, it felt colder than it should. Eleazar stepped forward, eyes wet, but he didn't reach out until Moses nodded. Aaron placed each piece into his son's hands. Careful, like passing a flame. When Eleazar put them on, the fit looked wrong for a second. Not because the size was wrong, because Aaron's body expected the weight. Moses adjusted the turban on Eleazar's head. The gold plate caught sunlight. It flashed once, bright and sharp. Aaron stood in simple linen now, the desert wind touching him like a stranger. He looked at Eleazar, his son, now the high priest, and he felt pride and grief collide. Then Aaron looked at Moses. His brother's jaw tightened, his eyes shone, and Aaron realized the cruelest part. Moses would have to walk down without him. Aaron took a slow breath, tasting dust and sky. He didn't ask for more time. He just asked one thing with his eyes. Don't let them forget what this cost. And the wind answered with silence. Eleazar stood in the garments, and the mountain wind treated him differently. It pulled at the blue robe. It flicked the sash ends. It made the gold plate shine and vanish, like a heartbeat of light. Aaron watched and felt 2 truths at once. The priesthood continues. Aaron does not. Moses stepped back as if giving space for the new reality to settle. For a second, no one spoke. The only sound was wind and the soft clink of gemstones when Eleazar breathed. Eleazar looked at Aaron, eyes searching. Father, what do I do first? Aaron almost smiled. The question was so human, so small, and it carried a nation. He walked closer and adjusted the breastplate strap with careful fingers like he had done 100 times. You don't rush, Aaron said. You don't perform, you listen. And when you're afraid, you remember. You stand here for them, not over them. Eleazar nodded, swallowing hard. Moses turned away for a moment, staring over the edge. Aaron knew that posture. Moses was bargaining with God in his mind, even if his mouth stayed shut. Aaron stepped beside him. You will go down, he said quietly. Moses' shoulders tensed. I don't want to. I know. Below them, the camp was invisible under distance and haze, but Aaron could imagine the people, drinking, cooking, arguing, forgetting. The world keeps moving even when someone's life is ending. Aaron sat on a flat rock. The stone was cool in shadow. He rested his hands on his knees, and for the first time in a long time, his hands were just hands, not instruments, not symbols. His breath came slower now, not painful, just shorter, as if his body was already letting go of its claim on time. Eleazar knelt beside him. Will they accept me? Aaron looked at his son and thought about Korah, about the budding staff, about the thirsty crowd. Authority always gets tested, always. They'll watch you, Aaron said. Some will fear you, some will envy you, some will blame you for storms you didn't make. Eleazar's eyes lowered. Aaron lifted his chin gently. But you don't chase their approval. You chase God's voice. Moses finally faced Aaron again. His eyes were wet, but his face stayed strong, like a man who refuses to crumble until the task is done. Aaron wanted to comfort him, but comfort can become denial. So Aaron did something else. He reached out and took Moses' hand, one firm squeeze. No speech, no sermon, just brother to brother. The wind rose again, and the sky seemed too wide. Aaron leaned back against the rock, eyelids heavy, and Moses realized with sudden fear this mountain wasn't only a place of transfer. It was a place of goodbye. Aaron didn't fall. He simply stopped fighting the air. His breathing became quiet, then quieter, like a lamp lowering its flame when the oil is almost gone. The wind kept moving. The sky didn't change color. The world refused to pause. Moses leaned closer, listening, as if attention could hold a life in place. Eleazar stood stiff in the garments, not daring to move. The blue robe snapped softly in the wind. The breastplate stones clicked once, tiny and sharp. 12 small knocks on a door that was closing. Aaron's eyes opened a little. He looked at Eleazar first, not at the clothes, at the man inside them. "Don't carry it alone," Aaron whispered. Eleazar's throat worked. "I won't." Aaron's gaze shifted to Moses. His brother looked older up here, like the mountain had pulled years out of him. Moses tried to speak, but his voice broke. So he didn't. Aaron's mouth curved, barely, a small, tired kindness. Then Aaron's eyes drifted toward the horizon, where the desert met the sky in a pale line. He didn't say any final speech. He didn't ask for the camp to remember him. He didn't argue with God. He just let his shoulders sink. And then there was stillness that wasn't sleep. Moses stayed frozen for a long moment, hand still in Aaron's, because letting go felt like agreeing with death. He wanted to be angry at the people, at himself, at the wilderness, at time. But there was no one to shout at on this mountain. Eleazar lowered himself to his knees. The gold plate on his turban caught sunlight, and Moses hated that it still shone, hated that the sign of priesthood could look so alive when Aaron was gone. Moses finally released Aaron's hand and covered his face for a second, just a second, not because he was weak, because he was human. When he uncovered his face, his eyes were dry again. Leadership doesn't always allow tears to last. He looked at Eleazar. "We go down," Moses said. Eleazar hesitated, staring at Aaron's simple linen, at the calm face, at the beard moving slightly in the wind, as if the mountain itself was breathing for him. "We leave him?" Eleazar whispered. Moses didn't soften the truth. "Here. No grave marker, no crowd, no speeches, only the place God chose." Eleazar stood, the garment settling on his shoulders like a new weight. He took one last look at his father, trying to memorize a face without the breastplate. Then he followed Moses toward the path down. Behind them, the summit stayed bright and empty, and below, the camp would soon see 2 men returning, one wearing Aaron's calling, one carrying Aaron's absence. And the people wouldn't know yet that their era had ended, until they saw the missing shape beside Moses. The walk down felt longer than the climb, not because the path changed, but because the space beside Moses had changed shape. Every few steps, Moses glanced sideways without meaning to, as if his brother might still be there. Each time, he saw only air. Eleazar followed, the garments moving with him, the breastplate catching sunlight in quick flashes. From far away, it would look like victory. Up close, it looked like a burden. Neither of them spoke. Words would make it real too soon. When they reached the edge of the camp, the first people noticed the color. Blue robe, gold plate, stones shining. A few ran closer, relief already forming on their faces. "They're back," someone called. "Aaron is—" The sentence died halfway, because Aaron wasn't there. A woman clutched her child. A man stepped forward, then stopped, like his feet refused to accept what his eyes were telling him. Moses stood still. He didn't announce it with drama. He didn't punish them with a sermon. He simply said the truth, plain and heavy. Aaron has been gathered to his people. Silence fell, like a blanket over fire. Then the sound rose, not screaming, not rebellion, mourning. It rolled through the tents in waves. People sat down where they stood. Some covered their faces. Others stared at Eleazar like they were trying to see Aaron inside him. Eleazar's throat tightened. He wanted to say something to prove he wasn't a stranger. But what do you say when you inherit a calling and a grief at the same time? Moses moved through the camp slowly, letting the mourning happen. For once, nobody blamed him. For once, nobody argued. Loss had taken their voices. That night, the campfires were smaller. Conversations were softer. People spoke Aaron's name like it was a room they were afraid to enter. Eleazar sat alone at the edge of the light, the high priest's garments folded beside him. He couldn't sleep in them yet. They felt too loud. A young man approached, one of the ones who had shouted during Korah's days. He didn't look proud now. I didn't understand, the man said, eyes on the sand. Eleazar waited. He stood between us and judgment, the man whispered, and we hated him for it. Eleazar felt anger rise, hot and quick, then fall away. Because anger was easy. The priesthood wasn't. He's gone, Eleazar said quietly. So learn. The man nodded, tears in his eyes, and walked away. Eleazar looked toward the dark silhouette of Mount Hor. He couldn't see the summit, but he could feel it like a closed door on the horizon. And in the quiet, a new fear settled in him. If Aaron's life had been the boundary, what happens when the boundary is a man still learning to stand? Mourning didn't stop the desert from being the desert. By the third day, the air was hot again. The sand was the same. The needs were the same. And the camp began to move because even grief has to walk. Eleazar put on the garments before dawn. This time he didn't hesitate as long. The blue robe slid over his shoulders, the breastplate settled against his chest, and the stones felt colder than he expected, like they were remembering Aaron. People watched him from a distance, not hostile, not friendly, measuring. A calling can be confirmed by God and still doubted by men. Moses gave directions with a tired voice, and the tribes began to line up. But a shadow followed them, Edom's refusal, the long way around, the feeling that the land was always just beyond the next ridge. Then the scouts came running. Arad, they said, a Canaanite king. He's coming. Panic rippled through the camp like wind through dry grass. This wasn't a debate about authority. This was fear of losing what little they had left. Eleazar felt every eye turned toward him. The high priest, the boundary, the man who is supposed to stand between. For a second, he wanted to step back and find Aaron, to hand the whole weight back to the shoulders that had carried it for decades. But the mountain had closed that door. Moses met Eleazar's gaze. The look wasn't comfort. It was a question. Will you stand? Eleazar's mouth went dry. He could hear the clink of the gemstones as his chest rose with breath. He remembered his father's whisper, "Don't carry it alone." So Eleazar did the one thing he could do without pretending to be Aaron. He called the leaders. He told them to bring the people close, not to fight first, but to vow, to turn fear into focus. The camp gathered, faces tight, hands shaking, children pressed against legs. Eleazar lifted his hands, not high, not dramatic, just steady. And the people spoke together, promising that if God delivered them, they would not treat the victory like their own. Moses' eyes softened a fraction, not approval, relief. The threat didn't vanish, but something shifted inside the camp. The panic stopped being a wildfire and became a single flame. Later, when the enemy finally pulled back and the captives returned, the camp cheered, quick and loud, then grew quiet again, like everyone remembered the cost of arrogance. Eleazar stood at the edge of the celebration, watching. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man wearing his father's robe, learning how to breathe inside it. And as the night came down, he glanced toward the dark horizon and realized Aaron had been the end of an era, but the wilderness wasn't done testing the priesthood, not even close. The wilderness didn't end with Aaron. It ended with what Aaron left behind. Weeks later, Eleazar stood alone near the tent at dusk, the camp quieter than usual, not peaceful, just worn out. He could hear cooking pots, a baby crying, a distant argument that never fully became a fight. Ordinary sounds, the kind that pretend history isn't happening. Inside the tent, the almond staff rested where Aaron had placed it. Eleazar had gone to look at it more than once, like a son visiting a grave without a stone. Tonight, he didn't go in. Tonight, he watched the people instead. They still kept their distance, not because they hated him, because they remembered fear, because holiness had become a thing they associated with sudden consequences. Eleazar finally understood what his father had carried all those years, not just rituals, tension, not just authority, loneliness. Moses walked up slowly, leaning more on his own staff now. The prophet looked older every day, like the desert was collecting its payment. "They're settling," Moses said. Eleazar answered honestly. "They're surviving." Moses nodded once. Surviving is not the same as trusting. Eleazar's eyes drifted toward the rows of tents. "My father stood between them and judgment," he said, "and they blamed him for the space he saved." Moses didn't deny it. "People blame the boundary," he said, "because the boundary reminds them they aren't gods." Eleazar's jaw tightened. He hated how true that was. A child ran past, laughing, and for a second Eleazar saw Aaron in the camp again, moving through the crowd, holding a censer, standing in the gap. Not as a legend, as a tired man who kept showing up. Eleazar turned back to Moses. "What do I do when they accuse me next time?" Moses looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Do what your father did. Don't chase their praise. Don't fear their anger. Listen, obey. And when you have to step into the middle, step in." Eleazar swallowed. "And if I fail?" Moses' eyes softened, but his voice stayed firm. "Then God is still God." The words didn't remove fear. They put it in its proper place. Eleazar looked once more toward the tent. He didn't need to see the almond blossoms to know what they meant. God had defended Aaron's calling. God had still allowed Aaron's weakness. God had ended an era on a mountain without witnesses and kept the priesthood moving forward through a sun with shaking hands. Eleazar inhaled the cool desert air. He could smell smoke from campfires and faint incense. 2 worlds, 1 people. He lifted his hands toward the darkening sky, not dramatic, not loud, just steady. And in that small, quiet act, the real legacy of Aaron took shape. Not power, not prestige, but a man who keeps standing in the gap, even when nobody thanks him, even when he's afraid, even when the wilderness is still the wilderness. And somewhere beyond the tents, beyond the dunes, beyond the long delay, the land was waiting. But Eleazar knew the truth Aaron had lived. Getting there would cost more than walking. It would cost trust.